Let's talk the 30-year illusion. Just recently been getting dogged out on X from individuals who either follow me and or follow what I post at Lisa Hampton _, in which I made a reply to the WNBA's ESPN coverage of the Tempo game, in which they tried to assert that there was a sellout crowd in Montreal, which is how we pronounce it for those of us here in Quebec. Okay, you say Montreal, it's Montreal. And that being said, I came correct, and that is they offered tens of thousands of free tickets. And so my point was said then as it is now, wherein you are trying to give out free tickets and you gamble that that process in and of itself is going to guide you to have an individual show up at the games, you downplay, downgrade, and adversely impact women's sports through the manufacturing of marketing by misrepresenting sellout crowds. I said it, I hold true to that. Like it, love it, or hate it. So let me give you some facts, okay? Now, there's no doubt that Bell Center here in Montreal sold out. It did. But there's a difference between a sellout crowd and tens of thousands of tickets being given away for free. You don't have a WNBA crowd here in Montreal as we have for our one and only hockey team. We don't have that. And we're not like Toronto. There is no Raptors basketball team here as of date. So to assert to us, those of us who are on the ground, and this is the problem I have with the WNBA, you don't get to tell me, you or the ESPN, what happens on the ground here in Montreal. And what happened on the ground was that we didn't go out and purchase tickets. There were tens of thousands of tickets given away for free. And there's nothing wrong with that except when you manufacture free ticket sales to translate to sports and spectator sports and those that are interested in participating in spectator sports. You know, you got lights flashing and crowds roaring, and, you know, the network executives are all fixated, on, how great things are going. But that's not really what happened. And this is a 30-year-old marketing loop that women's sports need to break out of if we truly want to survive. You say, well, we've been here for 30 years. Well, I figured you would say that. So let me give you some of the reality of what 30 years has looked like for us. From 1996 to 1997, the WNBA launched with massive hype, but that hype came from the 1996 Atlanta Olympics, which I was on the ground. Young, but I was on the ground. So I know what happened at the 1996 Atlanta Olympics, and I still have my little pins they used to give us children, right? At the little pins, and I have an entire necklace full of pins. But more compelling and more importantly, I was on the ground. So I know what transpired, and I know the hype that we got, and rightfully so. You have Cheryl Swoops, Lisa Leslie, the one and only Don Stately, and then we also had Rebecca Lobo and the like, okay? So I can name off the entire squad, but you already know what you know. I think Tarasi was rocking with them too. If not, baby girl should have been. Nevertheless, I know Rebecca Lobo was in the building, no doubt. So with that being said, so what did the executives do? They initially utilized that as a platform to go and host several meetings with our late great former commissioner, David J. Stearns, Shiva. Okay? And so as a result of that, they eventually end up getting a squad. We built the momentum. At least that's what we thought we were doing in 1996. So, but fast forward, by the time we got to 2016, the WNBA had hit rock bottom. Or were they always rock bottom? The attendance had plummeted to historical lows, like under 6,000 fans per game. And that was in what we call the major markets, okay? Those were the major markets, the New York markets, right? This is before an Atlanta Dream Team, okay? And before they had agents take the money of Dwight Howard and two other players from the Boston Celtics and defraud them before the Atlanta Dream came. But nevertheless, I had to throw that in there. Before the Atlanta Dreams, the larger markets were clearly deemed to be a New York market, okay? And Connecticut, okay? So that was deemed as your larger markets, as it were. That being said, it was less than 6,600 people at any given game. The idea that once they see it for free, they'll pay for it next time has proven to be false for 30 years. Let me repeat that, trollers. ESPN, I love you, Stephen A. Smith. I wonder if it's you. I don't know. But I know what I know. So let me repeat this again. The thought or the idea that if and once they see it for free, they'll pay for it the next time, has proven time and time again for almost 30 years to be false when it comes to women's sports. You cannot manufacture a fan base. Let me repeat that. I've been saying this for some years. You cannot manufacture a fan base. I say that even for the podcast. I would rather have 2 people who follow me, who love me, I love them back, than to have 20,000 fake people who someone promised them something to tune in. This is why you don't see me do promotions here, which is why it's commercial free, respectfully, at least for now. Right? I have gotten several offers, especially because it's Seltzer Sports, to maybe do something with a Seltzer company. That makes sense to me. But respectfully, you cannot manufacture a fan base. You cannot. And as the founder of Fannikins, a unique brand of sports fans, we know the numbers. We know statistics. We have the data. You cannot manufacture this. And so as such, wherein people are getting upset and trolling me and being condescending, I'm blocking you because I don't have time for the noise. But nevertheless, it is worth me pointing out in this episode, it doesn't change facts. Spend time not trying to force those of us in the space of journalism to follow suit respectfully with your narrative, but allow us to create our own. And it is through the creation of our own that you might learn something, right? Imagine that. Imagine I'd have been halfway around the world for most of the summer. Imagine if I had WNBA gear to travel with. That may have sparked up conversation. Like, what is that? Who is that? They know NBA gear. I can promise you that. When I was in Italy and Milan, they had everything. They even have Kobe Bryant all over the place. Kobe, LeBron, Michael Jordan. Those are the 3. They barely know who Steph Curry is. And I had on my even girly daddy shoes that he has, the pink ones, the girl dad sneaker. They didn't know anything about that sneaker. But talk to them about Kobe, talk to them about MJ or LeBron, and they know that. Imagine that. Now, Reggie Miller was over in France at Cannes. I saw him with his little New York Knicks baseball cap. That's all I'm going to say. Imagine that. A former Indiana Pacer rocking a New York Knicks cap in France. Okay. Let's move along. The point that I'm making is women's sports don't need charity. All right? We don't need charity. We don't need manufactured marketing. We don't need to pack the Bell Center with promotional passes that might jumpstart an engine for a weekend. But then what happens to the paying fans, the ones who value the ticket enough to open up their wallets? Who keeps that car running? Who keeps that engine running? Who oils that engine, that piece of machinery? And how does this feel for you? That if, in fact, statistically speaking, we show that by the 10th year mark, we had plummeted. We did not rebound until when? Caitlin and Angel Reese? Imagine that. So while we're hyping it's 30 years, I'm going to say this to you, and I don't want to be rude or disrespectful. I have this conversation a lot. I get a lot of women who date professional athletes who seemingly want to, or are married to them, by the way, and seemingly think if they send stuff to me that I'm going to put their spouses out there for everything from domestic violence and or the relationships for STDs, abortions, pregnancy, and the like. And that's not the direction that I'm going, not even with Ron Ball, the Allen Iverson way. But we will be touching base on some significant issues that plague us as communities. And that includes the different communities, a community of women, a community of sports, a community of women in sports, etc. But that being said, the WNBA is operating like a bad marriage by constantly trying to reiterate 30 years. Okay, so what? You've been here for 30 years. It's like a bad marriage. A woman that's a victim of domestic violence could say she's been married for 30 years, but what was the marriage like, right? So when someone on our end tries to come in and just kind of present you with some documentation, some evidence, some information, rather than being disappointed and upset about it, why don't you take the opportunity to listen to those of us in this space, particularly those of us who are on the ground, right? Now, let me give you this, and I want you to hold on to this because I'm only going to say each of these once and one time only. I'm going to give you an error by error analysis. 1996 to 1997, our inaugural high. Season ticket and gate sales were the highest they had ever been or anyone had expected them to be. But what were we comparing them to? Hello, Tempo. So every time you look at Toronto Tempo's post on social media, it's always the historic. They broke a record. Well, hey, slow down. This is your inaugural year. What records are you breaking in comparison to who and what, right? And why'd you have to come to Montreal anyway? I mean, if you guys are doing what you claim you're doing in Toronto, why did you need to showboat here in Montreal? You're trying to build a fan base throughout Canada, throughout the provinces. It would have been nice for you to touch base with those of us on the ground to say this is what we're attempting to do. Hello, WNBA. Maybe if you said that, we would have been able to make some things happen. And you wouldn't have had to find yourself giving away tens of thousands of tickets. Okay, Maple Leaf? Nevertheless, what we do notice is that even in the first year, averaging 10,000 plus fans per game, that was only in their large markets. For merchandising, however, the opposite happened. It was a distinct low. Why? Because they were assuming that those 10,000 fans who were at the games were real fans. Someone wrote to me, why you keep talking about fake fans? How could you be a fake fan? This is how. If you're getting a free ticket, you're not there. You didn't open your wallet. So ideally, while you're filling a seat, that's all you're doing. You don't fill the void. You fill the seat, but you don't fill the void. So if you're not able to fill, F-I-L-L, the void for them is ticket and gate sales, merch sales. So one would question, if you're at an all-time high of 10,000 seats being filled for every game in the larger markets, respectively, then one would have surmised that the merchandise sales should have been off the chart. They weren't. It was the all-time low. And it's a low because it's fabricated, it's manufactured fan base. When you do that, people are not buying. They got the tickets for free, but they're not investing in merch. But there was also something else that was happening. Nobody was trying to walk around with WNBA throwbacks. It's 1996, AI's in the building, right? People looking for Sixers at best, They looking for the Sixers, the New York Knicks, right? The Lakers, Kobe. That's what they're looking for. Look at the class that came out of that, right? The class of 1996. So at best, people were looking for that. And they moved forward over the next 10, 15 years, dominating NBA in terms of merch sales, Allen Iverson being one of them. And I think to this day, no one has outsold him when we look at the data. And you look at it's akin to what we call like a per capita. So if you look at who was available, how many people were available, and what those percentages purchased, Allen Iverson to this day remains one of the leaders in selling merch for the NBA. Not even Steph Curry could touch him. We didn't find people running around New York City with Golden State Warrior. Are you crazy? We don't care. He could have 100 chips and y'all could give that to New Yorkers for free. We still gonna say no. Yeah, pause on that. Now you offer us AI 76s, that's what we were rocking. You offer us Kobe, that's what we were rocking. But by the time Golden State Warriors came out, we're like, we not wearing that. No disrespect, but we just wasn't gonna wear it. Now, I love his little girly sneakers, but to ask us to put on a Golden State Warrior jersey and he owes 4 chips, we weren't doing that. So he has since built up his brand, but it's not in larger markets like Atlanta, New York. It's not in those markets. But for California, it does what it does, right? But he will never get the New York market. The New York Knicks as a team, they dominate straight across the board. When you compare them, and Wemby, he has the global numbers. right? But I said that to say this. Even to this day, with all the hype about fanatics with Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese, who's walking around with WNBA jerseys? There's something to be said about how you pretend and you manufacture marketing. It doesn't translate to merch sales. It doesn't translate at the end of the day to making money. So now it's 2006 and it's 10 years later, and the manufacturing machine has plateaued. Season ticket and gate sales. It's mid 2000. The initial Olympic novelty has wore off. People see it, they know it. But to maintain the appearance of high attendance on television broadcasts, the league relied heavily on a manufactured marketing plan. Give them free tickets, people will show up, we'll televise it, and then eventually people would be willing to pay. Corporate sponsors bought into that in the massive numbers. But guess what happened? I can stay quiet because you can guess. The same thing. It didn't translate to repeated purchases, and it did not translate to the sale of merchandise. You need that. So even we keep talking about this gender gap with regard to the difference between the salaries of the NBA and the WNBA. You must also take into account some other variables that are considered in the CBA, collective bargaining, to include but not be limited to gate sales and merch sales. If you don't have gate sales and merch sales, at the end of the day, your media rights package and any and everything else that you're doing for advertising is going to fall off. The minute the advertisers realize they got swindled and pulled in, and if their people did their homework like I do, they're going to realize, y'all played this game in 96, 06, 2016, and 2026. Man, y'all got hoodwinked, right? Okay. Follow me. At the end of the day, they're not investing in butts in the seat, as we used to call it. Are these butts, B-U-T-T-S, butts in seats? You have no butts in seats. What you have is free ticket holders through their sponsors, through corporations that are sending families there thinking if you do this long enough, people will see it on television and they're going to want to participate. Go back to the show I did called ARMS, ARMS. And those are the acronyms, the arms race, the WNBA's reason for failure. Okay? It is not to slam. It is not to slight the WNBA. Not at all. I got love for the sport. But you all have to listen to what's out there. And you don't want to. And you want to lie. And you want to manufacture marketing. And that in and of itself is not effective. Okay, so here we are, 2006. You have over, and I'm going to use the right word because I remember sitting in on a meeting on this issue. There were warehouses of inventory that never sold because everyone was thinking this is going to be the year. We're going to be able to sell out. We're going to be able to do this. It never happened. It didn't happen. And a couple of things started to happen between 2006 and 2016. And with all due respect, that was also, the promoting of lesbianism and same-sex relationships. And that also became a catalyst for a reason for so many people saying that I'm not taking my children to the sport. I've been around a lot of men who are saying I'm not bringing my daughters to watch these women play. So there was something different about dealing with women in sports. There were different angles. It wasn't no longer just about the agenda of trying to get butts in seats, but rather the gender of those involved. And so there's this promotion of this, and people began to see it in K through 12 curriculums, and then they started seeing it on the collegiate level, and then it became apparent on the professional level. And people began to back away slowly but surely, and the fan base plummeted again. But did you ever have one to start? And the answer is no, you did not. So here's 2016. You're at an economic low point, the lowest they ever thought it would be. Now, our beloved David J. Stern has basically kind of clapped his hands together and threw them up in the air. Like, you guys figure this out. Because everything that y'all thought was going to work, it did not work. That was an era that represented the absolute rock bottom for the league's baseline. An average of 6,500 fans per per game, and that was in the larger markets. Okay? It's in the larger markets. So to create this reoccurring full price season ticket holder nonsense, media coverage was poor, financial viability was heavily questioned. All the while, WNBA saying support the women's sport, support the women's sport. Come a little closer, let me share this with you. You guys couldn't even get women to support the women's sports. So you think by bringing NBA ball players, retired and active, to a game that's going to bring women out to support you? You all missed it. This is what I never understood. You spend so much time talking about the importance and significance of promoting women's sports and women as a gender, but then you want men to endorse it. It doesn't make sense, right? You know, the saying we have out here, make it make sense, make it make sense. I mean, really, make it make sense. Make it make sense that you want women, you want to keep talking about the importance and significance of women's sports, but then you want to look to the men to help you get there, to elevate you. Why wouldn't you go into the 67% of female-headed households in America, particularly urban America? Why wouldn't you target that audience? Why wouldn't you reach out to women's groups, sororities, college campuses? I mean, interestingly, even when you were trying to do the quote-unquote free ticket thing, you still weren't reaching out to the urban corridors. You were thinking if we go into suburban communities and we give them the free tickets and corporate sponsorship that we've done something. Really? Who creates the styles? Who sets the trends? Who makes the decisions, CMOs, at the end of the day? What sells and what's not? In the United States is Black America. If you all had reached out to the very same group where almost 88 to 97% at that time of your players came from, you may have had something. But even while you all are running your mouths talking about women's sports, women in sports, women's sports, women in sports, the WNBA had a predominantly male coaches. Imagine that. So the majority of your head coaches were men, and those who were not men, the majority of them were white females. So here's the question. If 88 to 90% of the athletes are Black and they're women, and the sport is a women's National Basketball League Association, you don't respect women coaches enough to assume that they can do the job of coaching their own? You all didn't for almost 25 years. So spare us with this, women in sports nonsense, because that's what it comes down to for a lot of you. And we're not even going to talk about 2016. You guys didn't do nothing with your orange logo hoodies, proving the lifestyle apparel could move the needle. Did it? It did not. So now, 10 years in, it's a $1 billion high. But for who? Who's the $1 billion high for? 99% of the WNBA teams that are owned by NBA franchises are male-dominated, owned and operated. You all are no different. At best now, you've improved in terms of your hiring practices, but that had to be measured. Imagine that. Imagine a women's sport that doesn't want to hire women in any of your executive positions. Imagine a women's sport that has to rely on men to control the needle, not simply for salaries, but in terms of the corporate structure and infrastructure. This is what you guys had to rely on. So here it is, it's 2026. And here we are again. The narrative has completely inverted into this so-called historic boom. Same conversation we heard in 1996, driven by generational rookie classes like Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese. The intense player rivalries. Arenas are selling out. But are they? Total attendance records completely shattering previous milestones. But have they? Pricing courtside tickets $1,000, entirely organic hype. Nobody's paying $1,000 to watch the WNBA. Shame on you, even if you think you are worthy of it. Really? Who's paying $1,000 a seat to watch the WNBA? For Paige? Angel? Was it when she was with the Sky or Dream? I think you know what I mean. For Caitlyn, how'd that work out for everybody? I think Fanatics had invested tens of thousands of dollars in the hype of all her jerseys, and they were expecting, along with Nike, for them to fly off the shelves. Even had Dick's Shoe Store and involved in that. Had all these people supposedly placing orders and said everything sold out. Really? Then for those of us who know what we know, you got a free fever, which was cool, Indiana. That was cool, But nevertheless, they ended up giving away free jersey shirts for people to wear. The Dream did the same thing. But how did that translate? I don't see people walking around Atlanta with no Atlanta Dream shirts on, even with Angel Reese there. I mean, I really don't. I didn't see them in Chi-Town when she was at the Sky. I mean, come a little closer. You don't even have a whole bunch of people that walked around Iowa campus wearing Caitlyn's jersey. Okay? They always used to be a saying, don't believe the hype. Respectfully, don't believe the hype. But there is something to be said. We're back where we were in 1996. Unprecedented historical highs. Merchandise sales are soaring, 500 to 1,000%. Let y'all tell us. The market has shifted toward high-end, athlete-led streetwear collaborations, custom jerseys, officially establishing women's sports merch as a multi-billion-dollar fashion asset. Really? Do y'all really want to play these games? I don't think you do. I think we need to stop the nonsense and look at some realities, okay? Our reality is that over the last 30 years, we have to look at what the strategy has been. For 1996 to 1997, the strategy was Olympic momentum and an aggressive NBA corporate back-end. Sounds familiar 30 years later with the expansion teams? Tempo, owned by Maple Leaf, who also owns Toronto Raptors. Or the Philadelphia Eagles, the Philadelphia 76ers investment in the future team, right? I mean, if we're going to look at it for what it's worth, let's look at who still owns these squads. 2006, loss leaders, mass corporate seat filling, and free giveaways to hide the low organic demand. The operative word is organic, okay? What we're looking at is what was the core marketing strategy. By 2016, a stagnant niche, marketing, travel, pay struggles, visibility issues. Here we are here. Now it's star-driven commercialization. Caitlyn? Angel? No, not just them. You got Paige and a host of others. You girls are even now, or ladies, are even now doing tunnels. Now everything's about, let's show them in a tunnel, and then girls could see what they're wearing, and they're going to want to wear what y'all wearing. I don't want to be rude or disrespectful, but there aren't too many of us that could look at somebody who's 6'4", 6'5", and 6'6", and feel like we could fit into what they're wearing. It's a difference when we think of supermodels back in the day. When you had your supermodels like the Naomi Campbell types, 5'11", high heel shoes, with more of a sexy diva type look, people was willing to rock with that. It's kind of hard to look at somebody who's 6'4", 6'5", 6'6", and say, I want to wear that. The closest we may get to that is watching Angel Reese, and I say that respectfully, or Aja Wilson. Right? But a lot of what we see them wear is not something that the 99% of us are going to run to the store and buy. Or guess what? We're not going to wear it if you gave it to us for free. So, okay, you don't want the reality of what we're actually dealing with. So let me tell you this. Stay off of my platform trolling me about what we have to say. We come with facts. Facts. Okay? That's what we come with. And we come with it only with the sole purpose of taking the sport to its rightful place, one of respect and dignity and honesty, not predicated upon a marketing ploy that we have been able to see, and or if we've not seen it personally, then we've researched it and we know what we know. So wherein we're looking for the WNBA to set it off and have historical highs and sell out something like the Bell Center, you got to come with me here, catch the NHL game. You don't understand when you play with the Bell Center what you playing with. That is home to the home to the Canadians, Montreal. Okay, hockey. It is very difficult to sell out that arena. And the only way that you're going to do it is if you have fandom. And the WNBA does not have fandom here in Montreal. But I tell you this, if you wanted it, why don't you contact me? We can talk about it. Okay? Thank you for joining me today on Field to Rim Sports. This is Lisa Hampton. Love is selflessly authentic. Having all money, power, talent, opportunities now. Wrong Ball, the Allen Iverson Way, coming soon. We dropped the soundtrack. Why don't y'all listen to it? Check it out. Tell us what you think. We're doing a little something different, as you all know. Okay, but for those of you who enjoyed watching a sanitized version of A Life of Allen Iverson, I'm glad you did. So did all of us. But this is something that is not sanctioned, not sanitized. That's what makes it special. Okay?